Yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay, so
Cool. First off, thanks to you as an organizer, Pavel, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with this great lineup. I was watching my evening, maybe wherever you're based in the world, it's morning to you or whatever. So good morning to everyone on the other side of the world. And I'm very honored to be part of this lineup, and I hope that I live up to the rest of the speakers. So what we'll be talking about in the next 45-ish minutes or so would be a very simple 4-step plan to build your content strategy. So no matter if you're starting from scratch or if you're actually already have some content available but want to expand your content marketing operations, this will be a nice overview of what you can do and how you can structure that process in order to get more results quicker. So just a quick introduction on my end. My name is Vasi. That's the version my friends use, and that's the version that's easier to pronounce for international speakers. So I think it makes sense. And I've been doing content marketing for the past, let's say, 15-ish years now, mainly focusing in 3 different industries, which is e-commerce, SaaS, and B2B services businesses. These are all very different, but what connects them is the need to use content strategically at different points of the customer journey in order to attract, engage, and retain people throughout the funnel. So you can see here more about my social media channels and where you can find me online. I have a website with a blog section where I write a lot about content marketing and digital strategy in general. So I hope you find me in one of those 3 and connect with me after the talk. So what's the issue? Why are we even talking about content marketing strategy, and what are the usual problems that I see in my business up till now? So generally what I hear from people are issues in 3 main directions. The first one is a perceived lack of creativity. I say perceived because I believe that every business, no matter how dull it is on the surface, actually has a lot to share and a lot to say to an audience that's interested in your type of product or service. But what usually happens is that, especially smaller marketing teams, they feel like they don't really have those like really cool, impactful ideas. And building a robust content strategy helps with idea generation because it allows you to work in a very structured way, in a very easy way when it comes to idea generation. And it also allows you to not generate ideas on your own, but actually steal them from your customers. We'll talk about topic research in a bit, and you'll see more about like what I mean. The second issue is often the fact that there's a small marketing team, or there's even like a 1-man or a 1-woman marketing orchestra playing in the company. And this presents a challenge where you have a lot of ground to cover and very little resources to do that with. And what happens is that content creation, content production becomes almost like an afterthought. The more important thing is launching your next promo, launching your new product, or creating your new trial communication, but creating content sort of steps by on the wayside. And it's not really something we think about in the long run. It's something we arrive at in a frenzy in the last moment when there hasn't been anything posted on our social media accounts for the last 3 weeks or something like that. And what this causes, what the effect of that is that we post stuff on all of our channels that's haphazardly put together and that doesn't really necessarily reflect what the interests of the audience is. And by creating a very detailed content strategy, you have always a place to return to when you need to post something in a hurry. and you have already a predefined backlog of ideas that you can use on the spot. And the final issue that I see a lot of brands struggling with is that new channels are popping up and down, and new content formats are popping up all over the place. You all, I assume, remember the huge boom that we had with Clubhouse at the beginning of last year, was it? Oh gosh, it seems like ages ago. But it was all of a sudden where everyone was on Clubhouse and then no one was in there all just in a few months' time. So I see brands that are trying to launch on new channels and trying to create content on new channels without really understanding what's behind them, or without even needing to go into these channels to begin with. And again, coming back to the topic of today, a detailed content strategy helps you say no to the things that don't really make sense for your specific audience and say an emphatic yes when it comes to new channels that actually fit your audience profile. So once you have that filter of your content strategy, you can much more easily distribute your efforts and the resources you have in-house. So how do we solve this? How do we solve all of these issues? Well, obviously, the answer is building a content strategy, but what does this entail in fact? And I feel that it's easy to split that into 4 different categories of knowledge you need to accumulate and codify in your day-to-day work. So first off, you need to know who your audience is. You need to know who are the people you're talking to, and then all of the rest gets easier. So we'll start off by talking about audience research. Then the next step is figuring out what those people want to know or how they want to be entertained, depending on your content marketing strategy and your content marketing goals. So knowing what are the topics that you need to cover in your content to stay relevant to this audience and to really give them something of value, give them something specific that they'll enjoy and they'll like. And in this way, they'll build a relationship with your brand. The third one is knowing where to find this audience. So what are the channels where we need to be present as a company, as a business? What are the different formats that we need to use in order to get to those people that we've already defined very clearly in the first step? So usually I hear a lot of companies talking about we need to be creating more video, or let's say there's a lot of talk around podcasts currently. We need to start creating a podcast. And to me, this is a very simplistic way of looking at things, because you don't necessarily need to create anything. It all depends on the preferences of your audience, because if you're creating for a particularly busy audience that spends a lot of time in the office, in an open space, then maybe video is not the right answer. Or maybe you need to make sure that you have captions for every video you produce, because those guys will probably be watching that in a room with a lot of people and won't be able to watch the whole video. Or they would prefer to see a text that they can skim through rather than a video that gives them the information in a much more slower paced way. So again, as we can clearly see, each of these steps is connected to the previous one and connected to the first one. And then finally, one thing that I definitely include in a client content strategy is a way to boost the efficiency of the content production schedule. So imagine that you're creating one piece of content at the start and you invest, let's say, 10 hours of research and figuring out what you want to say and figuring out what's the best way to phrase that. And then out of those 10 hours comes one piece of content. Well, there's a better way of going about it. And what you can do is actually work with the tools of repurposing and content distribution to get to more people with that same initial investment of research time and effort. So the last step here is figuring out what are the channels where you'll be distributing your content and what are the different ways in which you can repurpose that content so that out of this initial first step come not one, but let's say 10 different pieces of content. So let's just dive into each one and get into more detail. And I'll make sure to leave enough time for questions in the end. I'll still be glancing a bit at the chat, but if there's anything that you want to learn more about, just drop it in the chat and we'll discuss it. So first off, talking about the audience. And usually what happens when I get together with a new client and we start discussing content and I ask about personas or about any type of information about the customer that we're targeting and the audience that we're targeting, they say, oh yeah, we have this already laid out. It's a woman between 20 and 40 years old who lives in a big city, has a substantial disposable income, and is very socially active. I feel like most brands are targeting these people specifically and not any other consumer of any different age group or geography and so on and so forth. Obviously, that's not the right way of going about it, because the broader your target is, the more difficult it is to create content. And you've probably all seen this one. If not, it's a joy to look at. It's very clear that just focusing on the demographics of the audience doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense even for just the simple purposes of ad targeting, let alone talking about content creation, because looking at those two people who have exactly the same demographic information, we're not really able to create content that would fit both of them, right? So at this point, usually it's still a big revelation for a lot of teams that we need to hop off the digital side of things, and we need to hop off the all of the tracking tools that we already have access to and actually talk to people and discuss with them the details around the types of information they consume and all the content they're interested in. But this is actually the most useful information you're ever gonna get when it comes to basing your content off of a specific data-driven persona. It's just that whenever we think about data, we more often think about specific stats and numbers and percentages and trends rather than the qualitative information we can get out of an interview or a survey. So usually what I need to do when I go into a new project is round up a bunch of people. And when I say round up, I mean that metaphorically, either to do some interviews or to do a survey or some other form of qualitative research to understand actually who the people we're talking to are and what they're interested in general. So here are a few questions we can ask these people to really base our content strategy off something very specific. We can get out of a well-structured discussion with a few people from our audience. We can already glean into the different sources of information that they would use, which can give us the different social media channels that will fit our content strategy, or the different influencers or opinion leaders that we can connect with and actually collaborate on content projects with. I already gave an example with the format preferences of specific audiences. This is another case where just talking to people will make a lot of sense to understand better if they want to read detailed blog posts, or if they want to read listicles, if they want to watch YouTube videos, or if they're very active on, let's say, TikTok or something like that. So you already be getting that information through this research. talking about topics that the audience is interested in. Obviously, just asking those people will help a lot to get that information and to understand. On this point, usually what we do is first off ask a blanket question and then give them some options, because oftentimes it's hard for people to come up with a specific topic that they're interested to hear more about. But still, it will be useful to give them the option to do that, should they be willing to. And then the other type of information you can get out of qualitative audience research is to understand what's currently lacking in your content strategy. So here I've used the question, is there any other topic you'd like to see covered on our website? It can obviously be your social media channels or your video content or your newsletter or whatever it is. So really understanding where the deficits lie, where the gaps are, in order to create new content that's actually even more useful to that audience. So in order to get all of that, like, the questions would oftentimes be the same, but the way we can get that information are pretty damn numerous. So you can get each of those through a number of different avenues. My favorite would be actually talking to real people, but if you don't have that option to actually do a direct interview, there's a lot of different ways to, as it were, feed that cat. So one of the options would be to gather this information through onboarding emails. So whenever a new person subscribes to your website, to your newsletter, starts a free trial or whatever it is, this is an example from my own newsletter, where the first email that these people get from me also asks them, like, what was the reason you subscribed to my newsletter today? What was happening? Like, what was the situation you were in? This is not a content specific question, but it gives me a good idea what the value was that this person saw in order to subscribe to the newsletter, which is still useful for me in a communication sense. Down the line, I would also ask them a lot of additional questions around content creation, including what other topics they would like to see covered on the blog, what are the other platforms where they would like to see my content, say LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it is. And the big beauty of this approach is that you get continuous feedback day in and day out through this onboarding series, because obviously, like, this goes out to people who are new to your digital and properties, who are still very engaged with actually communicating directly with your brand and who want to share more. And you'll be getting that information from every new subscriber. Well, not everyone, obviously. Like, I would actually say that a few % response rate on this type of emails is good enough, because you'll be getting new information day after day after day. The next approach on that one is, and here on the slides you don't actually see the pop-up because we were using a GIF that doesn't render well here. But what we could use is a site pop-up question. So you've probably all seen those. Hotjar is probably the most popular tool for this type of pop-up questions, where you're scrolling through a web page and you get asked a specific question popping up on the side of the screen. I usually use a sort of a 1-2 punch for this type of questions, where I would show up a quick, easy question to answer first, and then I would ask for more feedback. So an example on my blog would be, did you find this content useful? And you have just 2 options, thumbs up or thumbs down. And then once a person clicks any of those 2 options, they would see a follow-up asking for more information. So, for example, if they click on the thumbs up, they would see a follow-up asking, okay, so what other content would you like to see me cover? Or if they give me the thumbs down on a specific piece, which obviously happens, I would then ask them, like, what other information they wanted to see here but was lacking, and they didn't get enough information on that same topic. This is again a very easy thing to set up, and it will give you additional information throughout a long period of time. Another thing that can be integrated in the content marketing strategy would be a type of an annual survey that you can send out. So Intercom are a great example for that. What they do is they have this annual reader survey that they do year after year, where they ask people basically the questions that you already saw in my previous slide, and a lot of additional information around the content habits of their readers and the information that they're interested in seeing. This is something that gives you a lot of additional information. And also, if you do it on a regular basis, it will provide you with a benchmark, and you can see year after year if you're improving or not your content effort. This is a more of a long-term play, but it definitely works, and it's worth implementing in your strategy. And the final element here would be to just talk to people, really, one-on-one conversations where you have the option to ask additional questions, ask follow-ups, get into those details around what's useful to people and what they want to hear about, and what are the questions that they ask. So this is probably my favorite case study for the benefits of talking to your customers. The guy you see on the photo here, he's called Marcus Sheridan. He used to own a company that was focused on designing and building plexiglass pools for houses in the US. Back in 2008, he had, obviously, with the market crash and everything, he fell into hard times. And what he finally decided to do was to remove the showroom of his brand and actually only focus on digital content. And the way he was adding new ideas to the backlog of the company content strategy was to get information through the salesman. So every salesperson on the team was trained to actually get all the questions that a person would ask during an initial discovery discussion for a sales, and get those questions back to the content team so they could write short blog posts answering all potential questions that a customer might have around building, designing, or creating a plexiglass pool for their house. And what he says in one of the interviews that I read is that he wanted to be the most robust repository of information on plexiglass pools. And in the end, this strategy worked. It's a great example, again, bringing me back to a previous point, that there's no topic that's inherently dull, provided that people have the need to know more about what you have to say. So talking to people and actually bringing in insights from different team members is a vital part of that process. So getting just a quick discussion with a salesperson or a customer service rep who's talking to customers day in and day out, this is going to be a great source of new content ideas that you can use and a real understanding of your audience. Throughout the slides, I've included some tool recommendations. These are all tools that I would use on almost daily basis. I wouldn't say that there aren't any other alternatives out there, but these are the ones that I use and recommend. So you have access to the presentation in the end, so you can just look through them and see what's useful to you as well. So I hope you have some value out of that too. So once we already know who we're talking to, we want to understand better what are the different topics that we need to cover. So the first one would be obviously keyword research tools that we all use, know, and love. These would be used by everyone who's dabbled into SEO at least, or who's in the weeds of it on a daily basis. There's a very specific difference between keyword research for SEO purposes and topic research for content marketing purposes that I like to sort of clarify at this point. And this is the fact that whenever I'm looking at a keyword research tool, I don't necessarily want to use the exact same phrase that I see there. Obviously, if I do that, it will be an additional benefit that we will have from the content, because it might also rank if we're doing a job right. But my main focus here is to see beyond the keywords into the topics that people are looking at and are interested in. So, for example, the screenshot here that you see is a very simple example. If I'm looking at the phrase hiking and I see one of the phrases that are, one of the questions that is recommended here is why hiking is good for you, then I might write a post around like the physical and mental benefits of hiking, and this will be what I'm aiming at, the benefits of hiking, rather than trying to answer the question word for word. Although, like, there might be good volume behind it, there might be useful SEO benefit that we can glean out of it. So using a keyword tool will give you a general understanding of the topics. You can also use that information to design your content around specific keywords and try to get the SEO benefits out of it. But more important in my book as a content marketer would be to actually know what questions need answering and what information people are interested in general. Because I would also use this information to create social media content, to create newsletters, and so on and so forth. So it goes way beyond content that I would put on the website specifically. There's a ton of different tools that are available for this, and there's also a lot of different options for you to get that information out of them. I'm not going to go into the technical side. I think like we've seen some wonderful technical presentations, and just there's so much to cover that I would go into some other tools here. So the next thing that I would generally try to get would be question tools. So these are specifically focusing on full phrase questions that people are asking around the keywords that I'm looking at. A few examples of these would be Answer Socrates and Answer the Public. These are the two most common ones, where you would be able to look at a specific question list for your keyword of choice in order to get additional understanding of the topics people want to see and want to get more information about. So this doesn't necessarily differ. Actually, most keyword tools nowadays do have a section on questions. I like to, use at least two different instruments to go about this, just to get some additional ideas and to see if I'm not missing something by any chance. So this would be a nice combination of like the two most common places where I would be looking for new topic ideas. There's a bunch of different, more specialized, let's say, sources of information that you can use for that. One of those would be QuestionDB, who are sourcing different phrases from all across the internet and mainly focusing on Quora as a source. And here you would see a lot of additional information that doesn't pop up in the other two sources that you've already gone through. So it might be an interesting separate place to look at. If you're targeting some other language than English, it might not be as useful. I haven't had great success with that. But if you're focusing on the English language, then it might be helpful. And again, talking about topics rather than keywords as a focus for our research, we're looking at the general sense of the phrase rather than the specific keywords behind it. So if you have a good a well-based hypothesis that your audience in a different geography wouldn't differ from English speakers a lot in their content needs, then you can still use that information. So here we have some additional ideas. Like, for example, this was when I was doing this example here with the topic of hiking. This was the first place where I saw this amount of detail, where we're talking about the biggest difference between solo hiking and two-person hiking, for example, or talking about hiking and photography, which at a later point turned out to be a very a topic that's very popular that people want to learn a lot more about. So this was really the only place that actually highlighted the need for that sort of content. So again, the more tools you use, the more ideas you can get. Another example is a tool called QuestionDB. It's pretty hard to pronounce and spell out, but you have it in the tools section of the topic research part of this presentation. So the way it goes is you add the name of a subreddit that covers your topic, and then you see some of the keywords that are popping up in that subreddit. Again, here you'll probably see some information that you haven't seen across the previous examples. And obviously, looking at your own sources, provided that you already have content you've been creating over the past few months or years or whatever, and you can look at that information, this might be a very nice place to actually get ideas from and to get more information out of. What I'd be looking at when looking at content on our own brand website would not just be the number of views a specific content piece has received, but also looking at the engagement that that content has gotten. So for example, here you see I've highlighted this second example here on my own blog, where you have like a very long average time on page, although it's very few sessions to base that on. And still you have a bounce rate that's quite much significantly lower than the average for the website itself. So I'm seeing that this might give me an idea of like, this is a nice first page for people to look at, a nice landing page that I can drive traffic to. And the topic that I'm covering that's keeping the attention of this audience well enough. So this is a very simple example where you have that as an option. And since we're talking about the general content strategy, not just content that lives on your website, looking at your socials to see the type of information, the type of posts that get the most engagement and the highest organic reach, this would be another thing to analyze and understand in greater detail. What I usually do is I work with clients where we have like a weekly or bi-weekly meeting where we look at the performance of the content we've shared across the last few weeks. And we try to see the posts that have received way higher engagement than the average. And usually that also ties with the reach or impressions in like, it really depends, like the term depends on the content platform you're looking at. But here what you can get is not like a one-off win. Like you'll probably see that a few posts have received much more attention than the rest, but what does that tell you? Pretty much nothing. What you need to do is to try to do that over a number of weeks in order to start seeing some patterns. And you see, like, for example, a specific type of topics is way more interesting than others, or maybe a specific format that you're using is much more driving a lot more attention than the rest. So across a period of time, you'll be able to understand more about the different topics, but also the different content formats and so on. And again, quick reminder, talking to people and getting information out of your actual customers through qualitative research, this is going to give you a lot more additional information. So the end result of this topic research would be something like that. We'll create a bunch of topic categories that we want to cover with specific examples that we can start with, and this will create a nice backlog for the brand we're talking about. Here, the examples are pretty much top of the funnel type of content that doesn't necessarily talk about a specific brand or something like that, but you can use that same approach to go into more specific questions around different product categories, different services, and so on and so forth. Again, a few of the tools that I would definitely suggest you try out and use. And then we're arriving at the third category of information that we want to gather in order to create the content strategy. And this would be the channels and also the formats of the content that would fit what people want to see and what they want to learn about. So I would here focus on the channels more than the formats, because usually it's, in my experience at least, different channels come with different formats that work well for them. Obviously, you can't really create a lot of amazing audio content on Instagram because it's like an image first platform. So when you get a better understanding of the channels where you want to position your content, this will essentially point you in the right direction format wise. So one of the simple things that you can do in order to get a better understanding of what's out there is to sort of spy on your competitors. SimilarWeb, even in their free version, would give you at least some basic information around that. And if you're conducting a more in-depth content research, I would definitely recommend getting a paid plan and actually digging deeper. But this would be enough as sort of a starting point that you can quickly look at and then dive deeper into the social media platforms themselves. But for example, here a very basic example, looking at a specific brand that we're trying to that's successful in our region and for our audience, we can then see what are the type of traffic sources that they would rely on. And one thing that's specifically interesting for me in this content marketing sense of the word is looking at the social media content and what's behind that. So we'll be looking at social specifically and looking at what's the composition of that social traffic, where is that traffic coming from, so that we can say, okay, like obviously Facebook, WhatsApp is an interesting addition over here, and YouTube are the channels where we get most of the traffic from. Obviously, if you're talking about a brand like Burger King, then this isn't necessarily the key channels where this brand is being present. There might be others, but still it will give you a direction to research further. So you can go then and look at the Facebook page and actually understand what's the type of content that works there, what are the different formats that they're using, and what are, even like looking at the comments, what's the way this content is being received by the audience itself. And the other element on that end, obviously, like you've looked at your competitors, now it's time to look internally. If you already have a decent amount of traffic coming to your website, you can look at the different sources, be it in the sources report, or here I've presented an example with the social network report just because it's prettier to look at rather than anything else. But again, what I'll be looking at here is not just the total amount of sessions that I'm getting through a particular channel, but also what's the engagement like for people coming from those channels. It might turn out that the audience coming from a channel like Reddit, let's say here, which is driving a lot fewer sessions, but people who are coming through Reddit are spending a lot more time on the website, and they are subscribing to my newsletter, in this case, at a much higher rate than the people coming from Facebook. This might be a nice indication that I might want to focus more attention on Reddit and try to seed content there in order to get those benefits from a more engaged audience. Obviously, like the winner in this particular contest here is Instagram for this website. So it will be interesting to try to increase the efforts because it's already getting a lot of traffic, but also very well engaged traffic through the platform. And again, talk to your customers. As long as you do that, you'll be in a good place to really understand what your audience is looking for. Finally, here we come to the point of discussing like how we can increase efficiency. So we have an idea of who we're approaching, who we're talking to. We have a good idea of what we want to say to them, what are the topics we'll be covering, and what might be the nice channels to approach these people through. But we shouldn't necessarily stop there. We should try to understand better how we can increase the value of our content through content repurposing and additional distribution efforts. So what I want to draw your attention to here is that whenever we start producing content, obviously it makes sense to produce content primarily for your own content hub, be it your own website, be it a specific social channel that you've strategically decided upon. For example, like if you're a visual brand and you need to present your product in action, YouTube might be a better channel to focus your attention on at first than creating like written content in a blog format or something like that. No matter what's your content hub, it still makes sense to try to get additional eyeballs through different strategies to repurpose that content. So when we're talking about content repurposing, I like to set this up in 6 different ways in which you can repurpose content. So the first one would be changing the format. So a presentation becomes an infographic, a PDF becomes a blog post, or the other way around, and so on and so forth. The second would be seeding content, the same content in a few different channels. The most classic examples would be live streaming an event on YouTube and on Facebook Live at the same time. The third one would be changing the owner, or you can think of this as seeding the content in a different publication. And this might be creating a very detailed post on your own website, taking one nugget of information from that and spinning that off as a guest post on a different blog, on a different platform, or talking about something you've written about in your blog on a podcast episode by a different host. The most typical repurposing example that people usually think about is repurposing content by changing your scope. So, for example, a long video becomes a bunch of short video outtakes that you can share on social media to drive attention back to the original YouTube content, or combining several blog posts, let's say, in an ebook that you can use to generate leads and get additional attention. Changing the audience. So this would mean presenting, let's say, this current presentation that I'm doing, taking the video and then sharing it with a different audience, not just the people who attended the conference today, but people who haven't been part of the event but want to learn more about it, let's say on social, on YouTube, and so on and so forth. And the last repurposing opportunity here would be to essentially add additional authors to your content. So the very simple example here would be to write a post, share it on social, ask people for feedback on that social platform. Let's say LinkedIn is usually a very good place where you can start this. And then once you've gotten some additional information on LinkedIn, getting back into your blog content and incorporating that additional information into the original post, and then doing that whole content launch again with this now expanded and more detailed post. So there's also a bunch of ways where you can link these up and use them all together. But essentially what it all comes down to is you first create that great original piece of content on that topic that people care about, your specific audience cares about. Then getting the parts of this content and repurposing them in a bunch of different formats that you can then share on the channels that fit that audience. How do we know that? By talking to people. I think like you've seen that meme enough times already. So this is a very, very short introduction. I tried to get as much possible into this presentation. You can download the slides already on my website. And if you like this, you can subscribe to my newsletter as well. I was actually just preparing the next edition right before I jumped here. So if you subscribe now, you'll be getting one in your inbox tomorrow morning. And yeah, I'm ready to answer any questions. And thanks so much to Kevin. Of course, I meant fiberglass pools, not plexiglass pools. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm joining. I just was typing your slides, and
Oh, awesome.
better I will retype later. Yeah, because we cannot really copy paste from the document. So yeah, so thank you very much. We have a first question from Andy. Should small website try to cover most popular topics, or maybe looking for niche ones? So how to start? So for example, if you're a small website and you are trying to, I don't know, let's say go for a short-term credits, so what the content strategy should be?
So yeah, this is very much related to what I mentioned about the difference between topic research for content's sake and keyword research for SEO's sake. While with SEO, it's hard to rank for those popular topics if you're completely new and you're just starting out. The most important thing from a content and topic research perspective would be to hit the topics that have the highest potential of satisfying your audience's needs. So you might be using those popular topics in, let's say, Facebook content, or sharing about them in a LinkedIn newsletter, let's say. So you're not necessarily trying to rank for that per se, but you have a good chance of actually getting more attention through popular topics than something very niche at this point. So for topic research and for content marketing efforts, especially on social, it's good to start off with the popular topics so that you have a higher chance to achieve that viral potential, although that's like a separate thing and more of a magic than a science. So we can't necessarily promise that, but still you have better chances of getting more attention through popular ones. You're muted, Pavel, I think.
Right. How do you measure the effectiveness of the campaign or the strategy? Because we understand we are building this. We try to understand what kind of content we should produce. We produce the content, and what next? How we can measure this? How do you measure this?
If you invite me to the next edition, I'll do a separate presentation on measurement, because this is one of my favorite things, because it really shows people that content is not just about the creative idea, but also the strategic fit with what you plan to do. I would say if I try to cut this short, we can again look at 4 separate steps. So first would be to start off by defining your goals, which are rarely traffic. Usually we want to at least look for qualified traffic that we can then start selling to as quickly as possible. Oftentimes not within that same session, but still. We would maybe look for lead generation or for motivating people to start a free trial, like whatever it is. We need to definitely be clear on the goal that we have to set at the start, even before thinking about what's the specific content that will fit that goal. Then here comes the value of decent tracking. So you need to make sure that you actually have the means to understand like how many people are actually reaching that goal and how your content is driving that. The big issue here is that content rarely converts within that same session. So you need to be able to look at the longer customer journey across a few sessions. So here you might be looking at different platforms that allow for better session stitching for different users, so you can really get that information. And then the next step would be to actually build a detailed monetization model, and to understand, like, not just look at the initial conversion that happens and what's the monetary value off of that, but let's say if I'm bringing in a new customer to your e-commerce website and you know that the lifetime value of this type of user is, let's say, they're gonna convert 4 times within the year and buy stuff for, let's say, an average of $100 each time, then I'm looking at that whole value that's gonna come from introducing a person through content marketing to the brand that I'm promoting at the moment. Yeah, it's a very long story, but hopefully that gives you like the short version.
Okay, we have a deal. We have a deal for the next one. Yeah, because the content ROI, so calculating the the return of investment from a content, this is something what we are trying to do all the time. So, and it's really challenging story. So it's a metrics and how much do you spend and distribution and really a lot of things coming together to one place when you have to understand how much budget, if you invest budget in the content marketing, how much you can get out of it. So thank you so much, Vasilina. Thank you so much. And it was really nice to have you here. I just subscribed to the newsletter, so if you don't, please do. And we will have something new tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting me, and I'll be looking at the rest of the sessions today with like increased attention.
Okay. The next session will be with Łukasz, and it will be in 8 minutes. So keep in touch. Thank you so much. Bye.